Chair, we've started the streaming.
Lovely. Good afternoon and Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome to today's Place Select Committee on Thursday, the 12th of January, 2023. I am County Councillor Lisa Dimmock for Portskewett Ward and Chair of this committee. Just some housekeeping rules. If all members can keep their microphones on mute, unless they've been asked to come in, and to keep your videos on at all times. We've had apologies from Councillor Davis, and I understand Councillor John is standing in for him. Apologies from Councillor Stevens, and Councillor John is standing in for him, John Crook, and Councillor Jane Lucas. She's also sent her apologies, and Councillor Rachel Buckler is standing in. I'll take declarations of interest as and when, but I'm going to allow members and scrutiny officers and cabinet members to introduce themselves now. So, Councillor Brown. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Councillor Brown, Shire Newton Ward County Councillor and member of this committee.
Thank you. Councillor Bryn.
Councillor Bryn, County Councillor for Wysham Ward and member of this committee.
Councillor Callard.
I'm Councillor Ben Callard, County Councillor for Llanfaes Fawr and Gyfeilen, and I'm a member of this committee.
Councillor John.
Good afternoon, everyone. Richard John, member for Mitchell, Troy and Trellick, not a member of this committee, but standing in for Councillor Davis today.
Councillor Buckler.
Councillor Rachel Buckler, County Councillor for the Devorden Ward and standing in for Councillor Jane Lucas today.
Thank you. Councillor McConnell.
Good morning. Councillor Sue McConnell, Councillor for Cressonon Ward and member of this committee. Thank you.
Councillor Crook.
Councillor John Crook, Mega East and Andy, standing in for Councillor Maria Stevens of Caldicot.
And Councillor Strong.
County Councillor Jackie Strong, elected member for Cross Ward in Caldicot and member of this committee.
Thank you. And I'd just like to
Councillor
Ian Chandler. I saved the best till last, Ian. Honestly, I did.
Councillor Ian Chandler, member for Lantilio Cresceni Ward and a member of this committee.
Thank you, Councillor Chandler. Hazel and Rob, can you just both introduce yourselves quickly?
Yep, Hazel Eilert, Scrutiny.
Robert McGowan, Scrutiny and Policy Officer.
And then Cabinet members, Councillor Griffiths.
Councillor Paul Griffiths, Cabinet Member for Sustainable Economy.
Councillor Maybe.
Councillor Catrin Maybe. I'm County Councillor for Drybridge Ward and Cabinet Member for Climate Change and Environment.
And Councillor Birch.
Councillor Sarah Birch, Cabinet Member for Inclusive and Active Communities.
Lovely. And I'll allow officers to introduce themselves when they're presenting their reports. Is that okay? Lovely. So we've got no members of the public, I believe. So I'll move on to item 4, which is local toilet strategy. We are reviewing the 2019 strategy and progress report before it goes to Cabinet and Welsh Government is updated. So Dave, did you want to come in here?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, all. So I'll do a quick overview in terms of the current report. Two purposes, really, for this afternoon is to review progress against that plan strategy. It was scrutinised in April 2021, but obviously time goes by, so it's due another review before it goes back to Welsh Government. And the second element would be to agree those changes to the strategy in terms of a progress report, and then, as I say, that would go to Welsh Government. So the recommendations are as per section 2, so we'll get to them, I think, as we go through it later. The key issues, it is a legal requirement, it's a duty on the local authority to produce a local toilet strategy, and that was to be done by the end of May 2019. So we did comply with that. It was published in June of that year, and As I say, the other requirement is, as per 3.1, you do need to submit a progress update to Welsh Government 2 years later. Obviously, the pandemic came and bit us somewhat, so there was some delay in getting that to people, but that's common across Wales, Chair. So that's where we are. So 3 gives the legal context. 3.3 is just worth pointing out that you don't actually legally required to provide toilets, but obviously seem to be a good idea in terms of people using and facilitating our towns, not just local residents, but obviously visitors to those towns and villages. So we are quite well. We've got 18 plus toilet blocks, and that's what we think of as traditional toilet blocks within the county. Added to that, a number of other publicly accessible toilets, such as leisure centres. So that's all within the report. I don't intend going through some of the detail. I'd perhaps highlight to members 310. I mentioned there was a review nearly 2 years ago now that came to the Strong Communities Select Committee. So members asked a series of questions. Might be helpful just to quickly rattle through those. One was concerning the Severn Tunnel train station. So that was referred through to Transport for Wales. Obviously, they're the landowners. So they are looking to refurbish that in 2023, this year, involving cycle racks. And they're also looking at putting a toilet provision there. Signage. There was a thing about, I think you tend to find them in supermarkets, who cleaned it when. Speaking to facilities, they weren't too keen on that because people tend to vandalise anything that's not sort of screwed down within these blocks. And we feel that any complaints are actively recorded and acted on through local hubs and through environmental health as well. So we do act on any complaints. The main ones tend to be vandalism, unfortunately. Third point was about safety chains. That's something we would want to pursue. There was some confusion as to how they actually connected to emergency response. I think it came through from Councillor Easton at the time. Was an issue with Caldicott Country Park facility, and that was an audible alarm. So we do need to revisit that one with our colleagues in landlord services. Legionella testing, obviously, this was during the pandemic, clearly, so that was undertaken. All Legionella testing was done. Then there was a question regarding whether it's feasible to charge. Bit of a mixed bag, really. We did have one in Bulwark, for those old enough to remember. Wasn't particularly successful. I think we took about 30 pence a week, and it just wasn't financially viable to keep that going. So that was subsequently removed, and probably officers suggest that it's probably good to have free for everyone to use. Who's got loose change? If you do put card systems in, they tend to get vandalised. So probably from an officer perspective, we did consider it, but we would suggest that keeping access free helps, particularly elderly people and others, accessing our towns and villages. Private facilities, it does focus primarily on public blocks, which the report does highlight that half of these are now with town and community councils. In terms of private facilities, we're asked to explore that. Section 9 of the strategy does cover that. Basically, in a nutshell, the supermarkets are quite happy for public to use them as non-paying customers, but they don't want to publicise the fact. So that was done at national level rather than we all contact Tesco's, Morrison's and everyone else. They said in principle we're fine. We don't particularly want to put up toilet signs. It's not the corporate image we want to portray outside our front doors. But they are quite happy. Witherspoons and others would also be allowable for people to use those. Whitehorse Lane toilets was one that members raised 18 months ago now about why they're still open. Obviously, we're talking about that time they were closed in April, May time, start of the pandemic in 2020. So they've been closed nearly 3 years now. So it is a recommendation for councillors to consider that and recommend to the cabinet member what they propose to do in terms of that. But officers would support closure. There is some evidence behind that, which is in the strategy. Gwent Police had numerous antisocial behaviour issues there. The cost of refurbishing it back 3.5 years ago was in excess of 90,000. So that no doubt has increased significantly because it's been closed. And also you could say that there's 3 other very good blocks within Abergavenny within short distance of that location. So if members want to pursue that this afternoon, we can. The US toilet was raised as an issue in terms of layout. So they were refurbished last year. Landlord Service will revisit just to consider those overall dimensions in terms of compliance. So those are generally the points. The last one then is about disabled access. About, do we freely give keys out? And again, officers say, well, no, we wouldn't, because it's down to the individual to have a radar key to access those. Otherwise, they're subject to being used for different purposes. It's also in the strategy about changing places as to whether the council want to consider those facilities for more profoundly disabled persons, which is a requirement in itself. Just to say, it is in the strategy, because it's an update from the first one, is that our leisure centres will be listed as other facilities under the Changing Spaces website, so people know how to access them. We're looking to see if we can upgrade 1 or 2 just to get full Changing Spaces status. There is one in the Bridges Community Centre in Monmouth, so it would be good to have one in Abergavenny, for example, for people in the area that may want to access that facility. So that was the other aspect that came out at the last review. So the rest is as stated, Chair. I don't think I need to go through anything else on that. You don't want me to go through 20 pages plus of the strategy, I'm sure. The covering report provides the summary. The reasons are as stated. It is a legal requirement, 7.1. We're happy, obviously, to incorporate those further comments that members may have prior to approval of the updated strategy, prior to it going for individual cabinet member decision. The reasons for the closure of the block I just touched upon is as per 310, 7th bullet, but the details within the strategy itself. And finally, in the actual covering report, Chair, is Appendix 1, which is a summary of the initial action plan. So again, against that, we've generally done those things. Some of the things have been heeded somewhat by the pandemic. You'll remember that toilets opened and closed with all those different alert levels from Welsh governments. So we did what we could. 6 blocks were refitted and refurbished within that period of time. The grant is outstanding. That's one of the recommendations at the front of the report. So would like to move that forward, probably in terms of firing that money from one of my budgets to landlord services in conjunction with other elements of the council. And I do actually mention changing places there, Chair, under the action plan. So I think I've probably covered the other actions that are on there. So it is very much about accessibility, availability, so that has been mapped out. Welsh governments are in the process of updating those details in terms of Data Map Wales. So when that's available, and they're working on that this year, people will be able to, via their phone apps, know exactly where things are, and not just locations, what facilities are provided, be it baby changing, etc. Disabled facilities will be readily available. One of the other things I've mentioned so far is obviously some way of measuring our progress. That's item 7 on the action plan. So EHOs now do inspect those blocks, not just MCCs, but the ones owned and run by town and community councils. So again, that's in the report in terms of progress within the strategy as to the good, the bad, the indifferent, if you like. So we have made some progress, which will further in the coming year. Continue to work closely with Gwent Police, clearly. That's been quite a turnaround of police staff, but they certainly were engaged last time we reviewed it. Obviously important to take their comments on board. Events are quite dominant in Monmouthshire. I do chair the event group as well, and needless to say, we do action that. So any events that occur, a agricultural show, other things on open land, clearly they do need suitable toilet provision, and they were compliant as and when different alert levels were brought in by Welsh Government due to the pandemic. Then finally, when we submit that to Welsh Governments, we'll act on any recommendations that they may have in terms of any notable practice, recommended numbers. I think we are well placed when you talk to colleagues in other some councils will not have any public toilets. So the fact we've got 18 is testament, I think, to some of the efforts that have occurred over the last 15 years to retain that stock in our towns and villages. So I'll conclude there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you for bringing this report. I just want to thank you, your team and estates for the fantastic job they do in maintaining our toilets across the county. Obviously, I was on Strong Communities, and I can remember we welcomed the cleaners to attend and listening to some of their stories. It's not exactly an easy job, but thank you. First is Councillor Bryn.
Hi, thank you for that presentation. I must say I think it's really positive that we have managed to retain so many public toilets in our area, being as I know some areas in England they have no public toilets at all. What I couldn't find on the report was any relation to stoma-friendly accessible toilets. And I know it doesn't take a lot of investment to make sure that public toilets are stoma friendly, but it makes a huge difference for accessibility for a group of individuals. It just takes us a few little tweaks and maybe signage on the doors. And I wonder if you could include that in our action plan, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for those comments. I'm not quite sure what stoma standard is. That's my ignorance. You have to enlighten me. What that is. Stoma? Is it stoma?
Yes, if I can chip in there, I think it's very important that our toilet provision meets the needs of people with health conditions of all kinds. I'm not quite sure what adjustments need to be made to our public toilets to make them stoma friendly, but I think it's certainly something we should look at.
I can say that there are guidance, and it's little things like ensuring there's a hook on the back of the door and that there's a mirror, and they're very small things that make a big difference. And I'm happy to send information through if that helps.
Yeah, no, great, thanks. You'll appreciate this sort of transcends a lot of different departments. So Landlord Services is probably aware of British standards, and so one of the actions, if you recall, was Maryport Street. So Landlord Services will attend to that because I don't know the physical attributes that are required for X, Y, and Z, so thanks for that. On the second one is part of the action plan to put signage up. It's more difficult with a brick-built thing with no windows, but we'll endeavour to give good signage. There is a toilet logo that we can use in leisure centres, for example. If you've got glass space, you can, but clearly you won't tend to have glass on a high street for obvious reasons. But we will provide proper signage. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bryn. Councillor Chandler.
Yes, thanks. And again, thanks for repeat what Councillor Bryn said. I think it's great that we have a good toilet or good range of toilet provision across the county, because I think it makes such a difference, both for residents, but also to make us an attractive destination for visitors. Having said that, I've got quite a few questions that I want to go through, if I may. The listings of the available toilets, there are a couple of errors in that. It's a bit out of date. It lists the library in Baker Street in Abergavenny and also the museum in Priory Street in Monmouth. Of course, both those buildings have closed down now, so they don't exist as facilities anymore. The bigger issue, I think, on the listing, though, and on the assessment of the toilets is there's no mention of the opening times of the different toilets, which I think will be really useful, because I'm concerned about the opening times and about when they're available. But also it doesn't give an assessment of in each of these toilets where there are baby changing facilities and whether there are baby changing facilities in both the female toilets but also in the male toilets. And I think that's important, and that doesn't get addressed in your integrated impact assessment when we're looking at things there. So I think that is something that needs to be addressed, if we may. Also, just looking at what you said about changing spaces provision. You do mention it in the strategy, but you just said it's going to be considered. I think that is maybe too weak a word for what we want to have in our ambition. I think we have an obligation to try and improve our facilities. So I'd like to see a stronger word than just we will consider it, even if it is a little bit more, we will explore, we will actively seek to, or something like that. Would be a much better phrasing. But just more generally about access or facilities for disabled provision. Councillor Bryn's already mentioned stoma-friendly toilets, but your survey user survey did say that 67% considered disabled provision to be inadequate, and I don't see any sense in the strategy about what you're doing to redress that very negative feeling from users about our provision. So I definitely want to see something that says this, that acknowledges that viewpoint and says this is what we're doing about it. At the moment, it's pretty much of this is what we've got rather than this is what we're trying to do. So I would want to see something a little bit more on that. I think, speaking also of the user satisfaction survey, I don't know whether you've got it, but it's not in the report about whether there's any disaggregation amongst user satisfaction between men and women and between other groups, between the young and the old, and particularly between men and women. I think would be very useful to have that disaggregation about their satisfaction with the facilities, because obviously they're very different. Finally, I think I'd also like to say about just given where things are moving in the public realm, some at least mention that we'll be considering or looking at options for making some toilets, where it is feasible and where it is safe and practical, to explore gender-neutral toilets. So that people that have gender reassignment or other non-gender conforming identities would feel safe using toilets. I think that's somewhere we need to go. And again, that's not addressed in the integrated impact assessment, where we're looking at impact on protected characteristics of gender reassignment. There is no mention of that at all. So that's a significant gap there. So I would like us to look at that. The signage you referred to that came from the Strong Select Committee, I wasn't at that committee, but my reading of it, we're talking about just information about where people can complain and who's responsible for the toilet. It's not about those sheets that you see on the backs of pub toilets where they're just updating it every time a cleaner visited. We're talking about more permanent signage, and I think we should be looking for more permanent signage, more information that we can give to our residents about who's responsible for the toilet, and claiming the credit if we are, but also giving them the opportunity to engage, rather than expecting them to be able to find a hub somewhere, which most people actually not engaging with the hubs. I think that is also important that we give that information. And then, sorry, finally, I know it's a very long list. Just also, it will be good to explore where there are gaps. I know you have consulted with community councils. But I know we've said we don't have a community council in my area, which covers Skenfrith, and obviously we get a lot of summer visitors to Skenfrith, and there is no public toilet provision in Skenfrith, and we are talking about a lot of visitors. And I feel, how are we addressing some of those areas where we are getting a lot of visitors, and that is causing a potential hazard and area because of that. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Can we come back, Chair? Yeah, thanks, Councillor Chandler. Very good points. Opening times, if you did persevere, right at the very end of the strategy, has got a link which says that everyone was mapped out. So the list of all those 39 premises, take your points, a couple of them need updating, but they are actually accessible in terms of opening hours, facilities available. So it should tell you exactly if there's baby changing and the opening hours. We generally close at 6. So there is a link there in terms of Monmouthshire's website, which would give you the detail as to, and it's all bilingual as well. So basically those facilities are mapped. As I said in my overview, that is going to be reviewed with Data Map Wales this year, so that will give you a clear understanding exactly not just where they are, what's there when you get there, disabled facilities, etc. So that's opening hours. Improved facilities seek actively seek. I take your point. You know, the use of the word explore, and so we could strengthen that. Access to disabled toilets. It can be a difficult one. I think if you get into British standards, it might force the closure of a few, because the dimensions may not be compliant for disabled facilities, but that's something we can certainly do. As I say, it's not my expertise. Landlord services would be able to advise better on that in terms of access. But you're right, the public survey did flag that up as 2/3 thought they were currently inadequate. I mentioned changing spaces. Obviously, any other disabled person could access those. User satisfaction, yeah, maybe potentially we'd revisit that, taking your point about genders and young and old. It wasn't followed up. We did follow the Welsh Government guidance at the time, so if you looked at ours, it's very similar to Caerphilly's, for example. So we did liaise regionally as to what was in the survey, but I take that point. And probably absolutely right about gender-neutral toilets going forward. That are safe to use for all people. So again, I think we can obviously put that in there for consideration going forward. Skenfrith, I think that probably the days of putting in new toilet blocks are long gone, just the sheer cost involved, not just building the thing. It's drainage, electric, recurring costs involved with that. I don't know if there's a local pub in Skenfrith, but we'd obviously actively engage with those private facilities to ensure people that are out walking, etc., have got access to toilets as close as possible to where they are. I think there's 18 blocks and another 20 that have got facilities. As I say, that's very good comparing to other local authorities. We're not complacent, certainly. So I think the quantity's there, but you're right, we need to obviously ensure the quality's right and make sure they're in the right places. But the feedback's very good, and you did mention feedback, and I asked the colleague, look for feedback on, do a social media review. The only one we could find recently was 8.8, Abergwenny bus station last month. To quote, as a disabled person, these toilets are a godsend when we are travelling in the area. We sometimes go to the west of England, and Abergwenny makes a great, on the page, resting point for a cup of tea, etc. The toilets are clean and tidy and well maintained. So I'm not saying that's that's indicative of the whole situation, but yeah, with public surveys, if you have got a bit of a gripe, you're going to tend to fill in the form, won't you? If you think they're great, you're not going to fill the form in. So it does come with that sort of health warning, doesn't it, in terms of surveys? But certainly, probably going forward, isn't it? Potentially review that in a year or two's time. Time does go quite quickly, so I think that's a valid point to revisit the survey as well. Thank you.
Can I just come back in there, Chair, to follow up?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think the surveys are still important, even if they are not always 100%. But there's a couple of things. That link that's in the thing about the opening times, that doesn't work. If you click on it, it doesn't take you anywhere. It's a broken link. The thing, though, I don't think you addressed about the baby changing facilities, about whether they're in both male and female cubicles, and we need to have that. But the reason I'm asking for that in the listing, and also the opening times in the listing, because I want us to be able to monitor, actually, are the opening times shrinking on the toilets that we've got, as well as do we have that facilities for both genders to be able to change their babies. I also have an issue with closing early just because the police are concerned about drug taking, because we don't close our parks because people are taking drugs in our parks, and we don't close other facilities because there might be antisocial behaviour. So I am concerned about visitors and residents not accessing public facilities just because of the actions of a minority that we're trying to prevent, those types of behaviours. But that's maybe a slightly separate point.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. Just quickly on those, I think other people want to come in. Apologies for the broken link. We'll look into that. It should be on the website. So for some reason, I should have checked that before I came, just make sure that works. From memory, it is by male and female toilets, baby changing facilities, but we'll check on that. But I'm pretty sure that was a Welsh Government requirement. But we'll certainly check on that. What was the other point now, sorry?
Sorry, it was about the opening, closing early.
Yeah, so opening time. That didn't have any effect on the changing hours of our current provision. So we do that, and actually they're very flexible. So if you've got Abergwenny Food Festival, they will extend those opening hours longer depending on demand. Often in the summer there'll be an event in Abergwenny, just using Abergwenny as an example. And also Bailey Park is opened up. We tend to forget we've got toilets in Bailey Park. They open them up for sports events, the Steam Rally at Whitsun weekends. So it is quite flexible. So if there's a requirement from the community because there are events, they will extend those opening hours. But to answer your direct question, we haven't reduced it as a consequence of Gwent Police saying we've got antisocial behaviour. It's something you've got to live with, as you say, and that's not to the detriment of your use of our toilet facilities. Thank you.
And if I may chip in response to Councillor Chandler's previous point, I think I would agree that it is very important to people's tourism experience. We are aware that it's very much, we have a number of tourism hotspots throughout the county, and as in Skenfrith, if there isn't a toilet readily available, we can sometimes have undesirable consequences. But I really don't think at the moment that we have the resources to start building toilet blocks in around the county. But I think it is certainly something that we need to look at in terms of our tourism hotspots and tourism experience.
Thank you. And I just want to highlight the fact that last week when Tudor Day Street call-in took place, members of the public attended and they did voice their concerns about public toilets and that they're not suitable for changing adults, no change in beds, and said it can be quite difficult when trying to change someone and you've got members of the public getting quite impatient outside. It's in the report 2.7. So Dave, if you could have a look at that, because it's something we do need to consider. Next, I've got Councillor Callard. And then I've got Councillor John and then Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. I'll declare that I'm a member of Abergavenny Town Council. And as part of that, I know Abergavenny Town Council has been seeking a service level agreement from Monmouthshire County Council on the toilets that they manage for some time. So it would be great if we could have a look into that to see if we can come to an agreement there. Also, I think I would disagree with the statement that there are other toilets available within easy walking distance of Whitehorse Lane. The closest toilets, really public toilets that are advertised, are behind the Market Hall, and if you're in that part of town with a toddler that needs the toilet, it's too far to go. And I'm sure the same could be said for the less able as well. I don't know if the council would consider an agreement with the town council, or it could approach the town council to see if responsibility could be shared, or at least start a discussion as to the future of those toilets to see if there is any mechanism whereby they could be reopened. I think that would be well received by the town council, and I'd definitely encourage that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Callard. David, did you want to come back in there?
Chair, if I can respond to
offer.
Sorry. Chair, if I can respond to that, I am also a member of Abergavenny Town Council. My understanding is that when the Town Council took over or entered into partnership with the County Council previously, the Town Council undertook a consultation and specifically did not wish to take over responsibility for the Whitehorse Lane toilets because of their condition, because of the additional cost of running more toilet blocks or maintaining more toilet blocks, and because of the cost of refurbishment. But I mean, obviously that can be revisited.
Yeah, just to add to that, it is unusual for the population size of Abergavenny to have that number of toilets, to be blunt. Brewery Yard you referred to, you got Castle Street, which is just a stroll down Neville Street, isn't it? And also the bus station. And then obviously if you're in Kibby Walk, you'd probably go to Witherspoons, which is readily available, and Witherspoons happy for that. And you got Morrison's the other side, so you've probably got ready access to about 5 blocks, both public and private, in the vicinity. As Councillor Birch indicates, it did go to the Town Council some time ago, and that they were they were not opposed to MCC closing that block, to use their words at the time. So the reasons are that it's been closed for nearly 3 years. There's good provision now of any. It's obviously for members. If you want to revisit, that's fine. And also negative feedback regarding White Horse Lane from the survey. And the repair costs would be astronomical, I'd imagine. They were £93,000 in April 2019. If anyone's had any building works done recently, you probably find that's gone up significantly. So 4 years on, I dread to think the cost would be to reopen that. And then finally, it was the one that the police identified as having particular antisocial behaviour. So those are the reasons for, but if members are minded to revisit that, that's obviously their prerogative. So that's the officer comment. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you. Councillor John.
Thank you. Again, thank you for the report, and I agree with many of the points that have been raised, particularly about accessibility. And I think Councillor Birch's point is really important. And I think back to when I used to take my grandma shopping, and she was really reliant on public toilets. And I think it would, if someone did have an accident, it's impossible to overstate how humiliating that would feel for them and how that would impact their quality of life and might make them reluctant to go out and keep fit and active in future. So I think that's a really key point. I support the point in the report about Seven Tunnel Junction. You know, if we're serious about making that a key transport hub, then it absolutely needs some proper toilets. I agree with the point about keeping them free because we want to encourage people to our towns, and I think we've seen in other local authorities that public toilets can be an easy target for cuts. And I am pleased. I haven't read the 567-page budget report cover to cover, but I can't see any proposals in there to cut public toilets. So that's something I welcome for next year's budget. And I do think the council's done well in retaining public toilets in recent years. I thought Councillor Chandler made a really important point about baby change facilities, and I say that as someone who a few years ago had to change my baby's nappy in the boot of the car because I went to the public toilets and the baby change facilities were only in the women's toilets. And it's ridiculous that in this day and age, it's still seen that the mother has a greater responsibility for raising a child than a father. And obviously there's a much broader societal issue there, but I thought that was an important point. And the last point I wanted to make was that when toilets do close, and obviously we want to try and ensure that they don't, but when they do, they can become an even greater target for vandalism, and that's something we've seen in my own ward. So I was consulted in 2018 by the Welsh Government, who were looking to close the toilets in Mitchell Troy, which weren't actually used by my residents because they're on the A40 as you approach Monmouth going northbound. So those toilets were closed, partly because of the new services that had opened a couple of miles down the dual carriageway. But they're still a target for vandalism and graffiti, and they're a real eyesore. So when toilets do close, they do need to be addressed, whether they're going to be knocked down or whatever. But there's still an eyesore on that road, you know, nearly 5 years after those toilets were closed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor John. David, do you want to come back there on any of those points?
No, all good points from Councillor John. Just on the final one, I'll say Welsh Government owned, being a trunk road, so we can certainly refer that back to them as their facility. Be all right, I drive past it and think, it doesn't look great, does it? But the other points, and I could certainly relate to the change in areas. My wife used to work nights, so I was always out and about. And yeah, they do tend to be secondary and male changing facilities. So that's certainly we can look at. Some have, but often they don't. Good points. Yeah.
Okay. Next, I have Louise Brown and then Councillor McConnell. Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think Councillor Chandler did make a point about the consideration of gender-neutral toilets, and in the pre-committee discussion it was suggested obviously potentially separate entrances, but that would have quite a resource implication for the toilets that we've got at the moment. I would be somewhat concerned if there was a recommendation to make all of the toilets gender neutral on the basis that often you have lone females in areas like car parks and bus stations and so forth who may feel a safety issue if they have to go into those toilets on their own, and it's also shared as a male facility as well. So I think that does need, if there were any changes in that area, it would have to need full public consultation on it. And I think that's just a point I was making. But the resource question, obviously it is important to keep resources open. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. And lastly is Councillor McConnell.
Thank you. Just a question, I think, really. I would absolutely concur with Councillor Johns about the need to remove things after we've closed them, remove toilets after we've closed them. £90,000 is enough money to build a house. I'm just quite taken aback that to refurbish something would cost that amount of money, and so I'm just really asking why the cost of that is so high.
Again, so landlord services came out with that. It's in the report, isn't it? That's hang on, bear with me. But basically, landlord services went around all 18 blocks, not just ours, the town councils as well. It's in table 2. 11.43. So that was their estimated repair costs in April 2019. The others seem, pretty low, don't they? So they must have thought that's, probably needs a new roof and all the rest of it. So retiling. But that's the cost they came up with, and obviously they do know what they're doing. So landlord services came up with that. If you look at the others, it seems surprisingly lower, doesn't it? The second worst at the time were Abergwenny bus station at 37,000. If you want me, I can query that with landlord services. They're the ones that came up with a figure of 93,000.
I would be quite interested.
Yeah.
Yes,
okay,
thank
sure,
you.
No problem.
I have been informed that there are problems with the roof and problems with the drains, at which point you're basically starting from the bottom up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Can I ask that be put on the action list to feed back to the whole group?
Yeah, of course.
With regards to costs.
Yeah, it'll be itemised, so that shouldn't be a problem, Chair. Thank you.
Lovely. Okay, thank you, everyone. So I think we fully scrutinised this paper. There were many comments. I think overall the comments were quite positive about the good range of toilet provision we offer in Monmouthshire. Councillor Bryn raised a very important point about being stoma friendly and good signage. The link to the MCC link for toilets does not work. So Dave, hopefully we can get that back up and running with opening times. We also want to know if male and female toilets have baby changing facilities. Councillor Chandler asked if the change in spaces wording can be slightly stronger or more, definitely stronger. It seemed a bit weak. What are we doing to address the lack of disability provision in toilets across Monmouthshire? User satisfaction, it also doesn't outline whether it's men or women completing these surveys and the age of them, so that'd be very good if we could have that data. He also requested a gender neutral toilets need to be explored and included in the impact assessment. We'd like to see improved signage, and can we look to explore where we have a high number of visitors and no provision in place. We really need to have toilets on offer for people who are travelling, tourism, coming to our beautiful county. Councillor Callard would like to revisit Abergavenny Town Council to look at sharing the responsibility of White Horse Lane toilets rather than closing that provision. There aren't any toilets nearby by the sounds of it. Councillor John said accessibility is very important and definitely supports the toilets at Severn Tunnel Junction, which I think all of us in the south of the county would definitely support that. And keeping toilets free is vitally important. I think we've all agreed that today. And can we contact, was it Welsh Government who owned the toilets on the, is it the 449, Rich?
On the A40 going into Monmouth.
A40, sorry, because they're being targeted by vandalism. And we also would like to know why costs are so high for refurbishment. So thank you, Dave. We always enjoy scrutinising public toilets. It's very interesting, but it is a vitally important provision. As someone who is starting to struggle with holding my bladder sometimes, and when I need to go, I need to go. So yeah, they are very important. So thank you ever so much. Next, we'll move on to item 5, and this is a report to provide an update on rural broadband. And I understand, Catherine, you're here to present this. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I'm Kath Fallon. I'm Head of Enterprise and Community Animation. You've asked for an update position, really, in terms of our rural broadband. First of all, I'd just like to thank my colleague Adam Greenwood, who's pulled the report, a very comprehensive report together. In terms of the picture, in comparison to previous years, we're in a very positive situation, which is really good to be able to report. In terms of the report itself, if members refer to paragraphs 3.13 to 3.15, you can see there's been a significant change in what we term as our rural deprivation rates, our digital deprivation rates. Those are basically based on what we call our open market research data, public review data, which actually looks at the plans that are in place for broadband providers to roll out the broadband, and actually those premises that are outside of scope, and those premises that are actually sort of therefore ones we need to look at from a public sector funding perspective. So as you can see in 2019, sort of 5.1% of premises in Monmouthshire were in that digital deprivation category. However, since then, and the OMR review actually only very recently took place. So if we'd actually come to you in November when we were scheduled to, we wouldn't have had this information, so it's very much hot off the press, really. But if I take you to the bottom of paragraph 3.15, it does say that 81.6% of premises in Monmouthshire should have access to gigabit-capable broadband from at least one provider within the next 3 years. If you compare that to 46.8% in Wales, we are doing very well. Now, that's not been the situation. A lot of that was down to a lot of lobbying and a lot of relationships that have been made with our broadband providers. So from my perspective, I think it's important really to raise the awareness of the significant investment that what we called altnets, or basically alternative providers other than BT and Openreach. It's an area that's attracting a lot of private sector investment, particularly Oggy, that used to be Spectrum Internet, that we're based, sort of the owner was actually in Monmouthshire. They've attracted £200 million to sort of light up premises, 150,000 premises in South Wales. There is a rollout programme in Monmouthshire, as your report details, and it looks at various sort of the different towns, really. I'm just trying to find that little bit. Yeah, so 3.24, where they're actually rolling out within Monmouthshire. In addition, Broadway have actually attracted £145 million worth of funding to do 250,000 premises in Scotland and Wales. So if we look at it from that perspective, it's all really, really positive. However, as we know, Monmouthshire is a beautiful county. We have a beautiful landscape, but with that comes its problems in terms of our very high hard to reach properties. And again, I really welcome an opportunity to thank particularly Councillors Brown and certainly Councillor Bucker, who this week have been really helpful in terms of actually being able to get, we're at the point now where the connections that are required are the nitty-gritty ones, where we need way leave agreements across people's land, we need civils work to get to people's properties from wherever the connection may be or wherever the cabinet may be, actually to get that fibre to the premise. Some of the data that's held is not necessarily accurate, as Councillor Bucker would have found this week, but actually that local knowledge and that actually that to be in a position to actually go and knock on a door for us makes a huge difference. So where we have got the sort of wards, and I know Councillor Chandler, your ward in terms of Lantilio Cresceni has issues, where we have that local engagement, it makes a massive difference in terms of how we actually get that connectivity in. So for us, whilst we don't actually manage any of the rollout projects, we can put, let's put it, we do negotiate quite heavily with our broadband providers to enable us to connect to those people that really need those connections. And certainly from our Cabinet member Paul Griffiths' perspective in terms of sustainable economy, as you all know, we have a significant amount of micro businesses in Monmouthshire, a lot of whom are operating in very rural areas. A lot of our children need to get connections online to be able to do their homework. They cannot do that without that connection. Similarly, from a rural perspective, rural local authority perspective, we need to be able to put some of our services online to make them accessible. To do that, we need that connection. So whilst this project and this report looks very much about what's happening with connectivity, we also need to have an eye on digital inclusion. So whilst we put those connections in there, we do need to ensure that people can actually have the skills to be able to connect into the services that they need. So for us, it's very much a twin track approach, working across the authority to ensure that whilst we may be putting services online and whilst we may be working with providers to get that connectivity in, we can't forget people that need that support. So we come at it from sort of various angles really, but I hope, and I know you've got a busy agenda today, I hope that gives you some comfort in terms of the distance we've travelled over the last, I would say, 6 years or so has been significant in terms of attracting that funding in terms of those relationships that we built with providers and the difference that has made. However, we are not complacent and we do need to deal with the nitty-gritty, the last 2 or 3 properties on a connection in a road to be able everybody to have that equitable access really. So that's kind of where we work as a team to enable that to happen. But again, major thanks really to councillors who are working with us to just get those, that have those conversations and make those connections happen. So happy to take any questions if there are any, Chair. Or
yes, there are. Thank you, Kath. Councillor Buckler.
Hello, Kath. Thank you for that. What I would be interested to know is, as you say, it's down to the nitty-gritty now with broadband connections. But it does seem there are still quite a lot of households that feel that they're not getting broadband anytime soon. It would be very helpful if members could know where these places are, where we don't have broadband sort of set up, whether the agreements haven't been done, but in each ward, if members could be told, therefore they can sort of work proactively with you in addressing these. Is that possible, Kath?
Yes, it is. If you look at point 3.20, as I said, my colleague Adam Greenwood did a brilliant job with this. It says there's a link there to where and when we're building. So that would give you the Openreach full fibre, where they're going. Now, it's never really, unfortunately, that straightforward. So we therefore have weekly meetings with Broadway for specific projects, but also we are able to ask them to provide us with their rollout plans. So if there are communities that that you feel aren't being served, as for example, Councillor Chandler has mentioned, we are able to get that update, and actually importantly to start creating relationships with the engineers who are actually working in that area. So yeah, you can check on that using that link, or alternatively, please feel free to email myself and we can actually put you directly in touch with who we believe those providers are, so who can actually sort of work with you really, because more often than not, if they're doing a rollout, it's quite helpful for them to have that community engagement, because it's all well and good putting the connectivity in, but they then got to get people to sign up to it. So there's various different aspects to this, so the more help we can get and more collegiately we can work, that would be brilliant. So thank you.
Lovely, thank you.
Can I just quickly come back in? Is there the same, ability to see Broadway in the way that we can see OpenReach, the fibre broadband? Do they have a link?
I can find that out. As a rule, we sort of tend to split, because what they put on their websites doesn't always necessarily correspond with the rollout plans, depending on what issues they're actually having locally. So I'd suggest if we have a community liaison point person, we can actually put you in touch with them. And I think the direct conversations, in my experience, are way more fruitful than the websites aren't always necessarily keeping up with what's going on the ground, because you can encounter quite significant issues in the last sort of 10 metres than you've had in the whole of the rollout up to that village. So if you can sort of liaise with us, that would be a quicker route for you, I'd suggest.
Thank you. Next, I've got Councillor Chandler, Councillor Brown, and then I'll allow Councillor Griffiths to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and thanks for the report. Obviously, this is one that I requested that came for full discussion at Scrutiny Committee. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for the most recent update, which is more positive than the report that we saw back in November that we didn't get to discuss. Obviously, as you said, the prospects on paper look a lot better for the county, because at the moment our provision in Monmouthshire as a whole is significantly worse than the Welsh average, and even much more significantly worse than the UK average. So it's good to see things are improving. I suppose I do have either an uncertainty or a cynicism about how robust those plans actually are. And I'll give you an example. In my ward, in fact, very close to me, we have a resident who is in an area where BT, where OpenReach, put fibre to the premises up as far as her next door neighbour, and then they ran out of fibres for the exchange. So her next door neighbour has full fibre. She doesn't. She runs a business from home, and her husband is also terminally ill with a degenerative disease. So she needs access to that. BT won't commit to whether they will or will not be able to extend to it. So they're saying it's still under consideration. So because it's still under consideration, it doesn't get counted as a white list, so she can't then get additional support for alternative connection means and funding for that. She's been in that position for years now. So this is not something that's just a sort of a temporary thing. She's been for many years. She's been faced with this blockage of the BT saying, well, we're not sure when we're going to do it or if we're going to do it. If they just said, actually, we can't do it, she'll be fine. She could go off and get some other provision. But because she's in this limbo, and I just wonder whether these figures that you're putting out is actually for the county as a whole, whether we're going to end up in that limbo and will they actually be delivered. So I suppose that's my concern. Without knowing the being able to drill down and see the details of that, I have an issue about that. But secondly, I think, and obviously from my perspective from a rural ward, it is for me, I'm not so much worried about the overall percentage for Monmouthshire. I'm looking at actually how do rural residents and businesses get served, because it's easy to roll out full fibre, gigabit broadband into more urban areas because there's economies of scale. But here in a rural ward, yes, you've talked about families and children. All our children have to get onto Google Classrooms now, even out of lockdown, in order to be able to access their schooling and do their homework. businesses, people wanting to work from home, so we're trying to reduce that carbon footprint of commuting. People need to be able to do that. But also our rural businesses themselves and our farms. If you're a farmer, you need to be able to have good broadband because you've got to be able to access market information. You've got to be able to access all sorts of different things and actually to be able to run your farm efficiently. And if we want efficient farmers that are prosperous, that actually produce the food that we want, then they need to have that access. And we have real challenges here. So I suppose it's not those averages I want to know more specifically about how we're going to ensure that the most deprived areas in terms of connectivity are the ones that get priority for new connections, particularly because those areas where we've got least broadband connection are also the areas where we've got least mobile phone coverage. So it's not as if you've got those alternatives to draw upon, because it's not just poor mobile phone coverage. We've got huge black spots of mobile phone coverage around my ward because of the hilly nature of the ward and things like that. So this is a real issue. So I suppose I just want to more confidence in those sort of projections in terms of coverage, but B, a sense of actually how we're driving and prioritising rural residents who are not going to get commercially viable solutions in terms of their rollout. And that's where public sector intervention needs to be prioritised, not in our towns and big villages, but in our rural areas. So thank you.
Kath, would you like to come back in?
Yes, please. In terms of that specific property, if you could contact me, we can actually do some dig a bit deeper with that one with BT directly. It does tend to have a benefit. At least we can find out one way or the other, and then if not, we can look at an alternative technology maybe. But if you can contact me directly on that one, that would be helpful. I totally agree with you in terms of we need to focus on our more sort of digitally deprived areas, our rural areas. Because of that, we have been a test bed for a 5G project that looked at Raglan Castle, Raglan School, and also sort of a usage of 5G in a farming environment. That's just concluded. So where there are opportunities for us to test bed alternative technologies, we are at the forefront of that, working very closely with Welsh Government. The other thing that we are aware of is you cannot always get fibre to the cabinet in a very rural area. The landscape just does not lend itself. So as a result of that, the reason we work as closely as we do with Broadway is they use alternative technologies such as wireless, where you would get your connection into your cabinet and then beam it from mast to mast. The other thing they do as well is something called white space, where they use the old analogue TV signals to actually sort of deliver the connections that way. There's also something called Veteran that runs along sort of to sort of telephone lines. So there are so many different technologies, and frankly, they're changing minute by minute, as you can imagine. So we do keep as close as we can, but we can't know where the difficulties are at a property by property basis. So I think, frankly, the only way we'll solve this, Councillor Chandler, is for us to work closely together. Hence my plea, really. I can't solve it from here. We need to be able to work together and use our connections to make it work. Hope that helps.
That does, and thanks for that, and I'm welcome to take that off. Can I just sort of supplementary, you mentioned Broadway, though. A couple of things. I mean, my understanding is Broadway are only working in part of the county. But secondly, obviously, the report on the investment in Broadway came to Governance and Audit Committee, and my understanding is that with the new £145 million investment that Broadway have externally, it shifted their priorities for work, and we were told at Governance and Audit that our original investment and partnership vehicle with them in order to work in rural Monmouthshire actually is pretty much defunct, is not the right word, but is unlikely to feature as a major part of their plans anymore.
I'm happy to pick that up with you offline, I think, in terms of the investment side of things. So very happy to talk that with you, but sort of not, pick up offline if that's okay, and I can walk you through that.
Thank you, Kath. Councillor Brown and then Councillor Griffiths. You're on mute, Louise.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Thank you for the report, and thank you for liaising on a particular issue in my ward. I would say that there are some problems with the provision of the infrastructure that's necessary to get proper broadband. Obviously, there's fibre to cabinet and there's fibre to premises. And in rural areas, sometimes it has to be fibre to premises because they're not located near enough to a cabinet. BT Openreach obviously do a lot of the work on the infrastructure, but I was concerned obviously about the fact that there are on occasions excavation charges, and I mean, people do pay to rent the lines through their internet providers, so it would have seemed appropriate for BT to Openreach to be able to provide these services without making charges to individual premises. And you know, obviously, I thought that BT Openreach provided infrastructure without charging residents to provide it. I appreciate on excavation charges, 2,800 may be contributed, but if it's obviously thousands more, then you know that's a potential problem to get internet provided into a rural area. Also, with regard to other infrastructure providers, you mentioned Broadway. I don't really know much about Broadway, but with regard to Oggy, one of the problems with Oggy is that they can provide the fibre to premises, but that's dependent upon them also being your internet provider, which means that there's no competition with other internet providers. And the internet provider, well, my internet provider was told that I couldn't continue with them, and I've got a 2-year contract with them, and obviously, you know, it would mean I don't know what the, you know, presumably have to pay 2 years of contract charges if ever I had fibre to premises through Oggy, because BT Openreach is recognised by the internet providers, but some of these other companies that are providing the infrastructure aren't. So, you know, that's a barrier to people actually wanting to progress with better fibre to premises. And I wondered how this problem of sort of a monopoly that BT Openreach has could be overcome.
In terms of your first issue, there can be problems with, I think, you know, the one that we were dealing with Councillor Brown was actually, there was no problem with the connection to the curtilage of the property. There were some problems actually on site that we're obviously trying to find a solution for, which ended up with the excess charges. In terms of who owns the ducting, where it's Openreach, it has to be open to any broadband provider because a lot of it is publicly funded. Where, as I mentioned, you've got significant investment into the private sector investment into companies like Oggy or Broadway, that is their ducting. So it's not, you know, where it's Openreach ducting, yes, it's open to all of that connection is. Where it is actually going in through privately owned networks, they own the networks. So, you know, that's something that's unfortunately just the way it is, I'm afraid. You know, so where you're using Welsh Government funding to actually lay the cables and the ducting, that's fine, and it can be open to all. But, you know, also we've had instances where Openreach have overbuilt in other areas as well. So it is a very complex area. So that's probably the best way of saying it, really.
Thank you, Kath. Councillor Griffiths, did you want to come in here?
Thanks very much, Chair. I just want to thank Kath and our officers for bringing this report to you. What I've read into it is that the council and our officers have, through quite dogged endeavours over many years, created a record of improvement, significant improvement in the county, and I want to thank them for that. Whilst there's been this scale of improvement, I thank the scrutiny members for bringing to our attention that we've not yet reached anything like perfection, and there are still major gaps and problems in provision through the county, and we need to continue to work at that. What I've learned since taking responsibility is that the context is changing constantly. Technologies are changing. Approaches which were appropriate only a year ago may be less appropriate now and need to be adapted. That means that we have to, as an authority, keep to be agile, but keep, as we have done, and this has been the work of our officers, keep as closely networked as possible with all our partners and providers in the area. It is that relationship and their knowledge that we're on their back, if you like, as well as supporting them, that is going to achieve the improvements that we need. It's in that context that Kath has arranged for me to meet with Broadway in particular in the next couple of weeks. And those of you on the committee who've raised particular points, I'll be seeking to work with you to make sure that those points are communicated to them. As has been illustrated, the role of us as ward members, not just my role as a cabinet member, but all of us as ward members, can be crucial in this. Information, it seems to me, either by the authority or by the providers, is never going to be perfect. And the amount of local information that we can all pick up about households, the case of Councillor Chandler, but many other cases of individual households which are missing out through oversight or for whatever reason, the more we can feed that in to our officers and through them to providers, the more likely we are to find some sort of restitution. So we can play a role in that way. The case which I've been aware of, where Councillor Buckler has actually assisted by brokering agreements between neighbours where that is necessary to make progress, again, is an illustration of what we can achieve as ward members, and I encourage us all to look for that. The discussion you've just had on if you like, the newer providers coming in, the example of Ogie coming into certainly my ward and many other wards throughout the county in laying new cable. There will be benefit. There's often public investment there, but there's private investment as well. As Councillor Brown has pointed out, you can only take advantage of that investment if you agree to switch contracts, and that's not always possible. It illustrates for me, but I don't have an answer, that there are perversities where we try to create competitive markets on what I would, perhaps in an old-fashioned way, regard as a natural monopoly. So we're in the circumstance where we're going to get competing providers ultimately laying competitive cabling up the same streets with all the inefficiencies and inconveniences that causes. I've been talking to our officers about this. The moment there seems to be no way of resolving that. The former resolution was that when BT and BT Openreach laid cables, then those cables had to be available to all other providers. But they are unique in that position. If anyone else comes along, be it Ogie or Virgin or whoever, then we're in the situation of having competing cabling. So for the moment, we have to live with that. But I will certainly be looking for ways of pressing on governments, UK, Welsh Government, whether there's a more rational way forward on those sorts of relationships. So again, thanks for the meeting. I've learned, thanks for the scrutiny, I've learned a lot from it, and we'll want to work with our officers to take your points forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. Thank you, Kath. I think we'll now move on to item 6, garden waste collection report, and I understand Carl is going to be presenting this.
Chair, I'll start off if that's all right with you. And then hand
That's
it to-
absolutely fine, Councillor Maybe.
Thank you very much. Okay, so this report seeks approval to deliver the garden waste collection service as a full cost recovery model, starting at £50 per annum in 2023 to 24, and based on a service of 20 collections at fortnightly intervals between March and November. The report also recommends that annual future uplifts and charges are based on the RPI index, which is published each November. And that's particularly convenient because it will ensure that residents are fully aware of costs of the coming year's service. So if people decide to cease the service at that stage, the bins can be collected out of season. So it's logistically a sensible timing for things. The background to this is that the service was initially grant-aided by Welsh Government. Monmouthshire moved from chargeable weekly sack collection to a chargeable fortnightly wheeled bin collection in 2020 to 2021, which improved the service for residents, improved health and safety for collectors, and it reduced the County Council's financial contribution following the annual reduction to the Welsh Government grant. So we were balancing the reduction in the Welsh Government grant, which was happening bit by bit. There were initial concerns with the introduction of wheel bins, but the service has grown substantially since the change from bag collections. It's extremely popular, and it's currently provided to 14,361 customers with 17,000 bins. So it's about a third of Monmouthshire households who use this service. However, while the introduction of bins reduced the subsidy, the service has continued to be subsidised by the County Council. A fee of £35 per annum was proposed for 2020 to 2021, but at that stage it was agreed to hold the fee down to £28 per annum, and charges haven't been increased since then. The popularity of the service, however, has resulted in an increase in the number of vehicles and staff needed to deliver it, and of course this means increased costs, as well as obviously increase in fuel costs over time. And the result is that the level of subsidy from the County Council in the current year amounts to £240,000. In the light of the budget pressures that we're facing as a council, along with other local authorities across the country, we are unfortunately forced to review this now. And a consultation was held on the future of the garden waste service during November, December, just gone. Existing customers were directly contacted regarding service options, and the consultation was open actually to all residents, but 99% of the respondents were actually existing customers. 6,158 households responded, which is a very high number. And as can be seen in the report, the four options they were given resulted in a very high proportion, 67%, opting to continue with the fortnightly service at the new fee of £50. This makes the service viable and it provides a full cost recovery model. There were a very large number of comments, over 3,000 comments, which have been included in the appendices of the report. As is often the case with this type of consultation, the majority of the comments were negative, but most also recognised how important and valued the service is, and the 67% response to maintain the service really is extremely positive. So the last thing I just wanted to say before handing over is, as Cabinet Member, I do recognise the importance of discussing changes in waste services with scrutiny. They're very important to households and residents. Recycling is one of the very few services that touch every resident, and this consultation clearly shows how important this service is to them. So we'd like to thank everybody for their responses and for the overriding desire to ensure that the service continues to be delivered. And at that point, I would like to hand over to Carl Tuhig, Head of Neighbourhood Services, to add anything he considers relevant, particularly regarding linked services, and to take any detailed service questions. Thank you.
you, Councillor, and I'd like to thank the Chair for allowing this report to be heard today. It was a little bit short notice, I know, and I can only apologise for that, so thank you for allowing this to come here today. As the Councillor said, we recognise the important role scrutiny plays in decision-making process, and we try and bring every report that impacts on waste changes through this forum, and we will take comments and ideas forward through to the Cabinet report next week from this forum, and we always have done. We recognise how important this is to the decision process. We were asked several questions through the responses, a lot of them around what the service costs and how we work out to £50 and how we work out the choices that we put in the consultation process. So we've got 14,000, just over 14,000 customers with 17,000 bins out there. We're currently charging £28 a bin, so that gives us an income of 480,000. On the flip side of that, the expenses are staff, vehicles, the running of the service that the residents would see every day with the crews out there costs 620,000, and then the replacement bins, the delivering of the bins, the support in the registration, because we pay for some additional staff at the contact centre during the registration period, comes to 100,000, giving us a total of 720,000. Take away 480, that's what you're left with, the subsidy that the council's currently paying, £240,000. I'd like to say it was all brilliant on our side and planned, and we knew exactly what we were doing. That would be a lie. When we come up with the £50 and the options, we had an idea of where we were going, but they were best estimates at that time. What the survey has done is firmed up that detail for us. So if we take that 14% of the people in the survey said they didn't want the charges to go up at all and they'd rather cease the service, that leaves us roughly 14,500 customers at £50 each is £725,000. That covers the cost of the scheme if every resident does what they said and sticks with it. We won't know that until April, May perhaps, when all of the customers have rejoined. So it is still a little bit of a risk. We don't know if it'll need to be subsidied, if there's a little bit of overachieving of budget. We haven't put in the costs for back office support. We haven't put costs for me being here today and those kind of management costs that are needed to run services. So we haven't included those costs. But if all customers come back, all 17,000 bins remain, and we are in a position then of charging £50, because that will hopefully already be agreed, there will be a overachieving of budget, and I guess some ideas from scrutiny of how we would see that going forward. We can't make a profit through the legislative process on this, so some ideas on if we do overachieve what we would like to do would be good to get from the scrutiny position as well. Hopefully that's given you some of the background. The council has covered a lot of the report, and I'm happy to take any questions. And I can see I've got a lot.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Maybean. Thank you, Carl. We'll get stuck straight in. So, Councillor Bryn.
Hi, yeah, thank you for the report. I think it's an excellent service and one I use myself, and I'm really pleased to see that it's going to continue. In line with a lot of the comments, many of which were negative, but some were positive. A lot of them were concerned with the £50 fee. With that in mind, I wondered if it would be possible to have alternative payment methods so that it's not a one-off fee for some families, and if it is correct and we do overachieve the budget, whether assistance can be supplied for particularly low-income families to help them with this cost, to reduce it for them, for those families in particular. Also, I know a lot of people raise the issue that some councils don't charge at all for this service, and I wonder if that is true and how they manage to do that. And whether you could tell me that when we introduced the bins, which are so much better with the £28 fee, whether that did in fact reduce fly tipping. As a lot of people, some of the threats were that if we increase the price, that will increase fly tipping. Did the introduction of a low fee bin reduce fly tipping? I don't know if you'd have that kind of figure for me, but thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Ben. On the first point, we don't know what income will come in until we start the scheme. We have to set it at £50, or we are hoping to set it at £50 based on what the consultation and survey came back with. If the survey was right, we are just about going to make the £720,000 needed to run the scheme. If there is a change in that and we overachieve, and you know, we can look at other versions. What we would want to do is, if we achieve 17,000 bins this year in an overachieving budget, we wouldn't want to put the bins up the year after for those customers, and we try and balance the books. We don't want to overachieve. Well, we are not allowed to overachieve budget. It's difficult when you're doing best estimates, but we shouldn't be overachieving anyway. And we don't want to charge, we don't want to charge residents more than we need to run a service. It's a much welcome service off residents, and we want to continue that, working with them closely to get the best service at the best cost. When we rolled out the bins, there was concern that we'd lose a lot of customers. That didn't happen. We actually increased customers by 2,000 people, so we didn't see any negative impacts on fly tipping. The reality is, changes in waste services are always accompanied with the threat of fly tipping. That very rarely comes to the fore. I'm not saying it never comes to the fore. People who fly tip generally don't use our CA sites, or generally don't use our council services anyway. They are above and beyond the law, so they don't usually get impacted by the changes that we make, because they're already not playing ball anyway. So it doesn't impact directly. It would be difficult with the current Civica system that we got to do monthly payments, or bi-monthly or quarterly payments, but certainly something that we could look at if we are overachieving for the year after. We'd be happy to look at that. And it may be the year after when, if we do overachieve, we could look at reductions for people on low incomes. The difficulty is this year, we're not going to know the customer base, and we recognise that £50 increase from £28 is pretty substantial in anybody's book. So hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks. I just thought if it was quarterly instalments, it would help with family budgeting for many, make it easier. Thank you.
Certainly something we'll look at going forward. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Bryn. Councillor McConnell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. I've read this with interest. And also, I'd just like to say thank you to the wonderful gardeners in Cresson Ward, my ward. It's an absolute patchwork of lovely gardens, and it provides an uplift to the health and happiness of the people doing the gardening, but it also they are contributing to the environment that the whole community lives in, and that is an uplift to their health and happiness. I completely sympathise with the need to make this a cost-neutral exercise in the times that we live in, however, and the situation that we're in. I do wonder whether, I'm also a keen gardener, we home compost a lot, so we don't use the service. And I'm just wondering whether, especially if there was an excess in this budget, or anyway, whether we should, alongside this, be actively encouraging gardeners to home compost. It doesn't have to take up a huge amount of space. It's quite achievable. And to that end, if there was a surplus in this budget, if it was seen in the round, we could be providing people with the composting bins, for instance, the equipment to do that. So that's just a suggestion about that. Thank you.
And we'll certainly take that on board, Council. We do provide cost price bins through our reuse shops, water butts as well. So that is happening, but this could be a way of assisting that further and making them below cost price. I don't know what that would look like, but it's certainly, you know, these are the kind of ideas that we'd like to look at through the scrutiny process. And I can't give decisions on it. I can't put these into the report because we don't know what we're going to achieve in monetary terms, in income terms, but certainly in the coming year then we will come back to scrutiny and through cabinet and say we've made an overachievement. Where would you like us to invest in with this service money?
Thank you.
Chair, may I add something to that? Is that right? Thank you, Councillor McConnell. It's really nice to hear that sort of positive endorsement and the point about home composting. And one of the things that I would like us, if we have the opportunity during the coming year to look at, is sharing knowledge and information about home composting, and giving good examples of people with town gardens, particularly of home composting. I know Councillor McConnell's particularly good at this, but I know there will be other examples across Monmouthshire, and I personally find it very helpful to learn from other gardeners on something like this. So I think that would be useful, and obviously it's supported, as Carl Turg has just explained, by our cost price composters from the reuse shops, but there might be more we can do. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Louise Brown.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think the garden waste service is very much appreciated, and thank you for the report. I did have some concerns about the way the figures were presented, and you sent a further email on it following a request about more of the details, but I'm still a little bit confused because originally the cost last year was 720,000, and you took away the amount that was gathered in income was 480,000, and so there was a 240,000 shortfall. And in the report it says that 240,000 is equivalent to £6 per customer. Now last year there was no subsidy, so instead of being £28 per bin, it was instead of being 35 per bin, it was 28. So, and also you said that there was additional customers, which meant that you had to have an additional vehicle, so that added, taking account of the extra vehicle and the income that you got, that was an extra 144,000. But the assumption of the number going down, you know, surely if the numbers go down, the vehicle, the need for the additional vehicle goes down. So those aren't those extra costs. So the cost of the service is still, if it stays the same, is still 725,000. And if an extra cost of 240,000 is £6 per household, I don't understand, even if it went up to a cost of 850,000, how that adds up to a 78% increase in costs. I mean, it seems to me as if possibly the maximum cost should be 37 or £40 per bin. I mean, if you're not entirely sure of what your customer base is going to be in relation to these bins, wouldn't it be sensible to have two payments in relation to the bins, so that the first payment was £25 and then the second payment was £25, and so that the second payment could be geared according to the number of customers you've got and the number of vehicles that you've got, so that people aren't paying more than they should be doing.
Yeah, so I tried to capture all that. I'll go through it. The £6 subsidy is from all households. So everybody in Monmouthshire is paying £6 through their council tax towards 14,000 customers using the garden waste scheme. So that's where the £6 comes from. So there's a subsidy of 240,000. There's 40,000 households in the county, so it's roughly £6 per household. Everybody pays towards the scheme. Every household pays £6, not the customers and not the council, because it is the public ultimately paying for the garden waste service in Monmouthshire. So that's where the £6 comes from. The additional customers is one of the options that we looked at if we did nothing. So if you do nothing and we put the garden waste service out at £28 again this year, it is likely that we will see an additional 2,000 customers based on what we've seen in the last 2 years. So that's the likelihood scenario. Those 2,000 customers will put an extra £200,000 cost on the service because we will need an extra vehicle, but they will only bring in £56,000 of extra income based on £28 per bin. So the £56,000 income would be against £200,000 additional costs. When you add that to the £240,000 that's already being subsidised, that's where that figure comes from. So in trying to give everybody a background of how we've got to where we are, some of the figures I recognise are a little bit confusing in the report, but hopefully the main point of the report is to say at the moment we have expenses of £720,000 and an income of £480,000. To meet the expenses of £720,000 with 14,500 customers, based on the customer responses, we need to charge £50. If all of those come on board, it will actually achieve £725,000. And as I said, we haven't included back office costs for this. We haven't included any management fees. So that is not a big over achievement of this service. If all 17,000 bins stay out in the service area, which is very unlikely, given that 14% of people said they don't want to see any increase in costs at all and would prefer to cease the service. So it's very unlikely that would happen. Potentially we could achieve £850,000. That is very unlikely to happen, but I would hope that it will be somewhere. I hope our customer base is strong and they want the service enough that we will land somewhere between 720,000 and 850,000. I am hoping that we can achieve the full budget, reduce any subsidy from the council so that can be put back into other services that we all rely on, and not only be subsidising our 14,000 customers, but services that all 40,000 households use. So hopefully that gives some background to the figures and how we've got to where we are. And my apologies that in trying to give background data to how we got here, it is confused more than helped, possibly.
Yeah, could I come back, Chair? I think the issue is that if the if there is a reduction in the number of people taking up the service, then surely that will result in you needing less vehicles and less staff. So actually, it should actually reduce your costs anyway. I just think that I don't think there's a very clear in the report. It's very confusing, and even in the email had difficulty in understanding how you'd arrived at the figures that you did do, and I am a bit concerned that with a 78% increase that it's an overestimate, and that in some senses if you charge if you split the charges and charge £25 and then a further £25, then in fact you could then give a second payment to what the service is actually costing.
And I understand that. Based on the 14% who said they didn't want the service if there was any cost increase. That pushes us back to the £50 fee. I do understand what you're saying, Councillor, but that comes out at £725,000, and that's following a survey with all of our customers, and that's where the sum comes out. That's not my sum now. That's backed up by data from the survey. The risk of doing it the way you said, of charging £25 for the first payment and then another £25, is that everybody signs up to the first 25 and then half of them drop off on the second 25 payment and decide not to carry on. All the first lot then would have to pay more money, again, over and above £25 to make the service viable, because we'd have much less of a customer base. If the 14% of those customers that said they wouldn't carry on lived in the more difficult areas for us to reach, like Glantony Valley, Bulliold Bottom, Botany Bay, and trying to name all of the council areas so that everybody understands it's not just one area that is difficult for us to service. If all of those 14% were in those difficult areas, we probably could lose a vehicle. That won't be the case. It'll be spread across the county. It's likely that we'll still need 4 vehicles to operate. Even if we lose 14% of the customers, we would need to get down to a number closer to losing 25% of our customer base to lose one of those vehicles. So we will still be carrying all the costs. We just won't have as many customers to share it amongst.
Chair, could I suggest as a recommendation that when the report goes to Cabinet, that a far better breakdown and understanding of the number of customers and the number of bins and how it's actually calculated is presented, because my local community council did feel that there wasn't any justification for the increase, and I'm still a bit concerned that there is an overestimate there. Thank you.
I agree, Councillor Brown. So, Carl, can you arrange that, a supplementary piece of work which clearly explains the costs and how you've come to this to go with the report, so that can be shared with councillors and community town councils and obviously residents? Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Buckler.
Thank you. Thank you, Carl, for this report, which is very interesting indeed. It's actually following on from the points very well made by Councillor McConnell about composting, home composting, which, as you say, is a very important part. And I would say for residents is all about education. It's actually very easy to do, and households might feel put off thinking it's a complicated issue. So I would say I would like to see, really looking at a scheme for composting bins, home composting bins, in a positive and active way, and actually letting people know how to do it in a very simple way, so that we encourage that, and it's an active encouragement. It's really reiterating what Councillor McConnell said.
Thank you, Councillor Buckler. Paul, did you want to come back in there?
Yeah. We promoted compost bins heavily around 7 or 8 years ago. Around 10% of the county is covered with people with own composting bins. One of the areas that we would like to look at more, and potentially if there is an overspend year, it would help there as well, is water butts. We all suffered last year with the drought. We all struggled with our gardens to provide enough water to plants. We were at the risk of having water bans in the area. It doesn't feel like it today, as I'm dealing with flooding, as I'm dealing with this meeting as well. But it's not that long ago that we were potentially facing water cuts, and we'd like to get those water butts out as well. So if we can do them at a better price, certainly we'll promote the own composting. We did a booklet several years ago, own composting how-tos, but the world has moved on from booklets, and I really do like the idea of doing some videos and how-tos which are more social media friendly, more YouTube friendly for people as well. So yes, we'll certainly look at that, regardless of what we achieve in our income. Those are the areas that we want to look at anyway.
Thank you. I think everyone will support that. Councillor John.
Thank you. Thanks, Carl. First thing to say is I think the crews do a great job, and certainly talking to residents, I often hear praise about how helpful they are. I want to make a few points. Firstly, I do recognise it's a painful increase. A 78% increase for any service in 1 year is significant, particularly 12 months after it went up from £18 up to 28. But having been part of the administration that made that decision and we decided to roll out the bins, there was an important principle that was behind it. You know, I often get asked by residents in rural areas, well, what do I get for my council tax? I don't live in the towns. I don't have the facilities that people who live in towns necessarily do. I get street lights. They then usually make a comment about the roads. And I have to explain, well, the vast majority of what you pay in council tax goes towards educating children, supporting vulnerable children, often with really complex needs, looking after elderly people. So there are lots of services that we pay for that we don't necessarily use. But we felt last year, and I think the principle still stands, that why should someone in a one-bedroom flat without a garden subsidise people with a large garden who choose to opt into this service to dispose of their garden waste? Or why should someone who composts at home subsidise someone who wants to use the service through their council tax? So I see it as different to many of the statutory services that we do provide in that respect. So while I do think it's a significant increase, I absolutely understand the reasoning and the principles behind it. I do feel a little bit wary about the recommendation saying that we should peg future increases to RPI when we don't necessarily know that the cost of the service will go up with RPI. It can be a service that fluctuates in cost. If it's particularly successful this year, we might find that we need to put on an extra vehicle and all of a sudden there's a significant additional cost there. So I'd be wary about committing ourselves in terms of where that future price will go, and I do think I think the administration just needs to keep an eye on that figure and choose a charge accordingly. I recognise Carl's point about the complexity of providing the service in very rural areas, and you can just look at the figures on page 3 of the report, and if I compare a couple of wards that are pretty much the same size in terms of population, Mega and Undy, 869 customers, Bulwark and Thornwell, 831 customers, Mitchell, Troy and Trellick, a very, very rural area, only 336 customers. So you can see that it is a service that's more popular in the areas that are easier to collect from. The other point I wanted to make was just a little niggle, really. I do feel a little bit uncomfortable with reports coming to scrutiny once they've already been published. I appreciate there's an opportunity I appreciate that the Cabinet members have come along to listen to members' views, and there'll be an opportunity for any member to reflect their views and concerns at the concerns at the Cabinet meeting on Wednesday. But certainly to give you some insight from how a previous administration operated, reports that went into the public domain for Cabinet, we would always have, obviously the Cabinet member themselves would have had significant oversight in terms of the development of that report, but also the Cabinet itself would have met informally to discuss these reports in quite some detail before they were published. And if we had some concerns about anything in a particular report or any of the recommendations in there, we would discuss those privately, and if there was a report that we didn't agree with for whatever reason, it wouldn't go into the public domain. We would discuss those concerns with officers and try and make sure that what goes into the public domain was right. So I appreciate it. Sometimes it can be really difficult in terms of timings, and it's certainly better to go to scrutiny now than not go at all. But as a rule, I do think things should go to scrutiny before the final reports are published. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor John. Carl, did you want to come back on any of those comments?
On the final comment, I can only apologise that the route that this is now taken, and I recognise that the scrutiny report should have been going into the cabinet, them coming out at the same time. It was the way that the cabinet and scrutiny fell after Christmas and getting the consultation document up to speed and being able to put that into the report. So I can only apologise. That I take it on the nose. It's my fault and bad timing on my part. But as Councillor John said, it is better for it to come to scrutiny and have that discussion. And certainly when it's reported to cabinet, the feelings of scrutiny will, we will make sure that that cabinet know what was discussed in scrutiny today on that report as well. I will add it in as an amendment, and I'll, Councillor Brown's comments around some confusion around the costings. I'll make sure that that's more clear in the cabinet report as well.
Thank you, Carl. Councillor Chandler.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Carl. And I don't think you should be too apologetic, because I understand your time pressures, because you want to get this clear so people can start registering for the new service in the year. So I think you're under a pressure, so I fully understand the timing of this. And thanks for all the work that's gone into it. And I think it's leaving aside maybe some of the confusion on the actual costings, I think it's a really comprehensive process that you've gone through, which I have to say I support. I think as Councillor John says, I agree with him that it should be a cost-neutral service. We shouldn't be making a profit from it, but equally that residents in areas, particularly those that don't have gardens, shouldn't be subsidising it. I think perhaps Councillor John's comments about why the take-up's less in rural areas, it's probably because we got bigger gardens to cope with our own home composting, so we have less need of the service perhaps, but who knows. I did want to come on that because I think Councillor McConnell's suggestion about, and if there is a surplus, that it should go into pushing out more home composting, and as you then added, which is what I was going to suggest, more water butts as well, I think would be very well received. I've got a couple of questions though. Cost neutral. Is it the case, and I can't remember, and I feel I ought to be able to remember from a previous briefing or scrutiny committee, but do we also generate an income from the composted waste itself once it is composted, in terms of being able to sell it or use it as fertiliser? So, and has those income figures been taken into account? So that's one of the things. Second, and I'm just a bit of a stickler for the integrated impact assessments and the protected characteristics, and sorry to raise this because it is a minor point, but it's related. You say one of the risks for the on age and disability is, of course, that it's an important service to have the home collection for people that can't get to the recycling centres, and then your mitigation for that is people could go to the recycling centres to pick up a home composting bin. So that doesn't quite match on that one. Just goes to show, though, I do read the integrated impact assessments because I think they're really important, but we've got to do more than just, we've got to take them a bit seriously. But thank you for that. But yeah, the income question I think is key, but on the whole I really support the proposal.
Thank you. Carl, did you want to come back in there at all?
I'll just do it really quickly, conscious of time. The compost is the garden waste is treated at a farm in Abergavenny. They use it to spread on their own land. They do give us some of that material, or we purchase some of that material back and then sell it through the reuse shops. That the education side of that is very important to us. The differential in costs of sending it to a plant that we're offering to give us some money back on it was around £250,000 extra costs, with a risk that we wouldn't achieve that income. So we think we've got the very best deal for our residents where we send it. The cost of treatment can't be included in the charges, so it sits outside this. The only charge that we can make is for the collection part of it. So it doesn't form part of the £50. Although obviously if we manage to sell all of the compost and make a profit out of it, we would be reinvesting it back in services, and probably garden waste would be one of those services. So we're not quite there yet. Take on board the point about the EQIA, yes, an oversight on me that if someone can't get to in the first place, how would they get it to pick the compost bin up? But you know, if there is an overachievement in thing, we do have recycling wardens out all of the time. So if someone's really struggling, I'm sure we could put a compost bin on and drop it off for them. I wouldn't want to do it for everybody because I'm not sure we could do that. But someone who is particularly struggling, I'm sure we could support.
Thank you, Carl. And also, as a member, I'd like to raise a few points. I use the garden waste service, and I think is absolutely brilliant. You know, increasing the cost that much, that is difficult to swallow. Could we look at exploring winter collections? I know my garden, I've got an awful lot of garden waste during the winter from fallen leaves all year round. You know, seasons are changing regular, can't even get that word out. You know what I mean. You know, and looking at neighbouring councils, I've seen that the average cost of green waste is £12. You know, what are they? How are they doing that? And where are we going wrong, really? You know, neighbouring councils are able to offer this service for free. Newport, Torvine, Monmouthshire will be 4 times higher than the average price of other councils in Wales. And I am very nervous about the number of returning garden waste customers come April. I think it's something we need to be, well, you obviously are concerned about it as well. There's a risk we could lose a number of them. I'd like to thank everyone for your comments on this. I know that lots of us have had feedback from residents, and it is a concern. Just to sum up quickly, alternative payment methods. Could we look at doing a direct debit payment, or splitting the payments for, you know, people that are going to find this quite difficult to pay in one go? Councillor Bryn raised a valid point about wheelie bins. Did they reduce fly tipping? And Carl explained that not really, it didn't directly impact that issue within the local authority, because there's people that are paying for the wheelie bins tend to not want to also fly tip in the first place. I think we've all agreed that we should be looking to encourage home composting. Councillor Buckler said about rolling out a scheme, you know, looking at educating people the benefits of home composting and using water bets. Obviously, depending on how the figures look next year, we may be able to look at offering these potentially free of charge, maybe, Carl. But obviously, it's definitely a more environmentally friendly option. We've asked for some clarity on costings. So if a supplementary piece of work could be attached to the report when it goes to Cabinet, that clearly explains how you come to these costs. Can you also include in the report the detail regarding the timing constraints of this report and why it's come to scrutiny now, and just how difficult it was for us to fit that in, and the process of which that didn't follow. And then Councillor Chandler wanted to know if we generate an income once the garden waste is composted, and obviously highlighted the fact that we say about people with disabilities and age, this is supposed to make easier, but then we're expecting people to come to the waste transfer stations to collect home compost bins. So if we could look at that when we're going through our impact assessment. So I think that's it for agenda item 6. Thank you everyone for your contributions. I'll now move on to item 7, which is the Place Select Committee action list, which I do have here somewhere. So we've got to add rural broadband to the next agenda item, to the agenda, which we've done. We've carried that out today. Reintroduce an action list, which we have, and to clarify whether the proposed 20 mile an hour in Monmouth will change. And the outcome on that was action to be completed once the review has taken place. Obviously, this will be updated as we go on. And then next is the Place Select Forward Work Plan. Hazel, can you just share that on the screen just so everyone has sight? But obviously we discussed this in the pre-meeting and I think we found a way forward now.
Just bear with me a minute, Chair.
That's okay.
Can everybody see that?
Yeah, so so we've got 2nd of February, we've got scrutiny of budget proposals. Then 2nd of March, we got public spaces, protection order for dog controls and revised local development plan. And now we're going to look at adding a special meeting date, and I think we've agreed the 29th of March, and that'll be transforming towns, strategic grant regeneration priorities, and transforming Chepstow master plan. And Hazel is going to confirm with Mark Hand if placemaking can also be included in that one. And then if you can scroll down, Hazel. And then April, we've got replacement local development plan, preferred strategy, pavement cafe policy, and the road safety strategy, which I think we've all agreed we would like to see on the agenda. And obviously May, then we've got the local transport policy and the economic development strategy in July. If there is anything that anyone would like to see on the forward work plan, can you please email myself, Hazel? It would be useful if you include all the other members as well, but we will send that out to everyone. Okay?
Yes, thanks, Chair. So we'll agree Wednesday the 29th in the morning for the special meeting. On the 13th of April, in the council diary, it's not clear what time your committee's meeting. There's a 10 o'clock and there's also a 12:30. So it looks like you have a choice there. So it would be good if we could decide.
Should we say 10 o'clock? Is everyone happy with 10 o'clock? Let's go 10 o'clock, Hazel.
Yeah, okay.
10 o'clock.
And then just to note on the agenda, it says that the next meeting is on the 3rd of March. That's a mistake. It's the 2nd.
Okay, lovely. And then item 8 is the council and cabinet work planner. Hazel, are you able to share this one as well?
I haven't got that one up on my screen, Lisa, but if people would like to have a look at that and see if there's anything else in there that they'd like to add, but please note that updates to those, that's a live document, so it changes all the time. So once a week, Democratic Services send out the update, and I believe the recent one was the day before yesterday. So keep your eye on that, and if you see things coming up, highlight them to us, but we also keep an eye on that as well and raise things with the chair to talk to you about. Hence the destination management plan, for instance, we know that slipped back to the end of the year, but there are are other items that we've highlighted, like the Mon Life Heritage Strategy. You know, that's something you might want to look at. So we tend to have a look at that and then talk to the chair. And if we think there's something you might want to look at, we put them on your work programme at the bottom under a list, and then you can sort of discuss them when it comes to this part of the agenda.
Thank you, Hazel. And lastly, it's to confirm minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of November. Councillor Brown?
Yeah, sorry, could I just clarify the time of the meeting on the 2nd of February? I've just found it in my diary. Did we say it was the morning or not?
Let me have a quick look. The 2nd of February is an afternoon meeting, PM, so it'll more likely be 2 o'clock.
So it'd be 2 o'clock, will it?
Yeah, that's right, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Is everyone happy with the minutes from the 10th of November? Yes? Brilliant. And obviously, if we've just discussed, dates for next meeting, 3rd of March, and a special meeting on the 2nd of February as well. Can I thank our visitors, Councillor Crook, Councillor Buckler, Councillor John. It's been lovely having you all here. You're always welcome back. And can I thank Cabinet members and officers for their reports today. I will now draw this meeting to a close. Thank you ever so much.
Thanks, Chair. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.